thank you for coming to hear about my new book, which came out today. That's kind of fun. I don't think
It's
I've
still
ever-
coming out today.
It is still coming out today. It's still in the process of being released.
Right
It
now.
will continue until 11:59. So yeah, I'm going to read you from page 5. There's really not much that has happened yet in the book, other than a sex act.
Oh.
And I don't think there's really anything you need to know yet. So I'm just going to read. So the character, his name is George, and he lives in LA, and he has just finished, he is a screenwriter, and he has just had a hit movie come out. So I lied, there is something you need to know. It was supposed to be 1956, supposedly autumn, even if California had nothing to do with such things. How else would it people itself? It even ensnared Americans, George noticed, and not just the Iowans and Kansans, but so too the New Yorkers, the Bostonians, the Philadelphians. People had left real cities to come here, and not even to flee a war. A few had done terrible things in what they called previous lives, yet most of the Americans he met in LA seemed seduced. Even grown men, and not just those men, were as foolish and careless as the young lied to teenagers who ran away from home. It made their souls easy to steal and sell back to them, enlarged and enlivened. To trouble them, to borrow and make an alteration and return. And even George, after a drink on some rich actor's terrace, ashing into a pool among the thrashing, laughing, most beautiful bodies on earth, even he felt happily dead. From the beginning, he tried not to know anyone. He failed. People liked him, and he, despite everything, liked people, especially Americans. Perhaps because they seemed so much more like dogs. His favorite American was Jack Turner, one of 2 men with whom he shared an office at the studio. Because they worked together and lived only a mile apart, and because George did not drive, Jack pulled up in front of George's apartment every morning and honked. It was so wholesome. In return, George made coffee stronger than you could get from any counter or cafe. Every morning, George remembered, their lips sipped from the same thermos, which wasn't anything Jack would notice. He wasn't the sort of man who'd care about lips. It wasn't incidental, however, that Jack was unmarried and childless and lived alone in a studio apartment on Hayward just before sunset took its crooked turn. George had taken this into account immediately. Yet there were years, he told me, always years, like the sepia silt that gathered on silver and tarnished your reflection. But one day, some poor country's failed revolution, he's from Hungary, polished time clean, and George saw quite clearly who his favorite American really was. Up until then, George said, it'd been so easy to believe he'd found a place to forget in forever. But life, he said, is like that. It rolls along its boulevards and shuts its eyes to the glare of the sun, and then you're bleeding to death on some street corner where a road named after a flower meets another named after a crook. It was Tuesday, October 23rd. All the history books would confirm it. A perfect day in California, but when wasn't it? You'll need to call a car tonight, George, Jack was saying as the attendant waved them onto the lot. They're breathing down my neck, and if I don't finish tonight, you'll have to come see me at the soup kitchen or the morgue. George searched for the right word. There was at least one of them for everything. Coincidentally, it was an incredible one. I'll be staying late as well. A late-nighter for both of us. There'd been, of course, no such plan. A successful film meant the studio was already pressuring him for a sequel, but he hadn't made up his mind to take them seriously or not. Death has come from above, Edwards had barked at him, so why not from below? But there'd never been a good sequel in the history of anything, so George had turned instead to another script, something about an imposter. He wasn't far along, and spending so much time with it at this early stage would hurt rather than help it, which didn't matter in the least. I think you mean an all-nighter, Jack said, but that's swell. Yes, George admitted. We'll get some dinner, perhaps some wine. The night was already getting carried away with itself in his head. Or bourbon, he offered, as all you Hollywood Jacks seem to prefer. I like the way you think. Jack knew nothing about the way George thought. At least one had to presume he didn't. Just as nothing had ever happened during the day with Elman, their office mate, there at his typewriter, so too would nothing happen in the evening. The 2 men, one must never forget that he and Jack were 2 established adult men, men with savings accounts and lawyers and references, would chastely type, drink coffee and bourbon, smoke cigarettes, and curse their failures of imagination, their shortcomings. They would write the films they were paid modestly to write. Of course, with Ellman present, there wasn't even the possibility of something happening, which is to say the possibility of fantasy. Ellman was nearing 50 and wore bow ties. His wrists, richly tendoned and colorfully veined as they hovered over his royal, were like the dried little sheaves of sage spiritually enlightened actresses threw into their fireplaces. He read Bertrand Russell on his lunch break and maintained an angry, if sincere, correspondence with the censors. It would be, George thought, like making love in front of your accountant, if love was what you could tell yourself it was. Even Ellman's movies were flops. Just once, Ellman said when George and Jack walked in together, one might consider that there are others in this world, indeed in this very room, who enjoy drinking coffee in the morning. Everything Ellman said, he never said it at you. He just unfurled it into the air like a flag and let it wave if it wanted, drape if it didn't. That looks like a half-full mug right on your desk, Jack said. Always the optimist. I will bring you a cup tomorrow, George said. One doesn't have to. This is true, yes. There's no compelling one, if that's what one means to say. No compelling one, Jack said, and turned to Ellman. He got you all right. They'd been together like this, the three of them, for 2 years. Occasionally, the studio shuffled in a fourth writer. Young men burdened with ideas who either quit or disappeared or got blacklisted. Men who thought they could mock McCarthy and get away with it. Men who doubted war. Men who said the word union and weren't even allowed to clean out their desks. Their possessions would be mailed, management said, after a careful inventory and examination. George had begun to suspect it was purposeful, these ambitious, feisty little failures flung at them as warnings. He was grateful. They helped deflect from his own oversights. Before the script that would become Death from Above, he proposed a film about an ancient monster deep beneath the Nevada desert, awakened by radiation. Why, they demanded, wasn't the monster hidden beneath Siberia? Why was it American radiation and not Russian that had endangered Las Vegas? He apologized. He was European, he protested. Sometimes he missed the subtleties of American politics. He congratulated them on catching his mistake and appreciated their generosity in putting up with his foolishness. He was as dusty, he said, as an old library book. The word is rusty, goddammit. Rusty as an old book. Get up. In his heart, he kept a private script, never put to paper, where the monster was not only awakened by but fed upon American bombs. And by the time they finally listened to the scientist, a Hungarian, say, that the only way to kill the monster was to starve it forever through complete nuclear disarmament, they'd sacrificed half their own cities in attempts to destroy it. That, George told me, would have been a film. Instead, this is what happened to his life. What had happened to his life. If he stepped out onto the balcony that overlooked the studio's backlot and connected all the writers' offices together, he could see a little suburban street somewhere in Middle America, an Old West mining town, an outcrop of Mars or the moon, depending on the light bulbs, and the opposing gates to an Arabian city. And beyond, palms, donut shops, diners, and thousands of miles of dazzling cars laced together and draped over all of it like a gemstone shift. It was obscene. Sometimes, alone, he said, I am in Los Angeles, just as he'd once said in the same tone of disbelief. I am in New York. It had become an existence, even if survival's cost, it seemed, had ruined him in other ways. Thank you so much, and congratulations. Just release the microphone.
All right, there we go. Congratulations. It's a beautiful book. I've read it twice now. So I guess the first question I'm going to ask is kind of a craft question, but not really. And it is, there's really, really beautiful writing in this book. There's passages that I highlighted and that I read out loud. But you also managed to make it a really, there's nothing wasted. It's a very efficient story. And I was wondering if it's a challenge for you, if maybe it just comes easily to write beautifully written passages and still tell the story. Is this something you do kind of simultaneously, or is it maybe done later through editing, etc.?
Yeah, this is an interesting question with respect to this book in particular, because with my first book, somehow I was very much kind of following the just puke it up advice, where you get the story on paper. It doesn't matter how bad it is, and you hear all these like things about it just matters to write it. And then I spent a really, really, really long time rewriting and rewriting and rewriting the same shitty book. And I was just really annoyed, and it took a really long time. It took 14 plus drafts to do that novel. This one was 3. And I figured out that basically I write the first sentence over and over, then I write the first paragraph over and over, and then I write the first page over and over, and try out different styles, different voices, and then finally when one clicks, the rest of the book just kind of falls out. So like what you are reading is very close to how I wrote it, just how I drafted it for the first time. And it couldn't come out without finding that kind of style and voice. Right. It drove the story.
Yeah. And I can see that from reading it, that makes sense, that tracks with me. Was there something about the time period and the locations, Los Angeles in the 40s, 50s, New York City earlier, I guess that would be 40s, and then Paris, that spoke to you? Is it something that you kind of knew ahead of time, or?
Sort of. So this is getting into origin story territory. So I'm sure some of us here remember and have mourned The Bad Waitress, which was on 26th and Nicollet. And they had all those science fiction movie posters all over the walls. And one of them, and I'd been going here for years and years and years, and one of them was The Earth versus the Spider. And it was a 1958 film by, I have no idea, but the screenwriter I noticed one day was attributed to Laszlo Gorob, and that was immediately recognizable as a Hungarian name, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to figure out what a Hungarian is doing in Los Angeles in 1956. There weren't a lot of places in America that were hiring Jews as they were coming into the country, if they were even let into the country. That's another, kind of a unspoken part of the Holocaust, is how many people America actually did kill by not letting in. And so, the setting and the time period, at least in the first part of the book, was very much set. And I knew that he would have this backstory of having come to New York and grown up with all these artists and had this kind of what he thinks as his real chance to become someone important, which he blows by. I won't story. I won't spoil anything, but he blows it, so to speak. And that kind of, it just fit together, and it was kind of like. Then it got into the structural territory of okay, then how does this whole thing come together? And that's when I start to think about the piece as an album or a symphony or something like that, where you need a sudden time signature change, and that's when I put the New York piece where I put it. Yeah. And then I knew that too, that there had to be a really insane climax, and I put that in after that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a party in the book that is unforgettable. It's things happen at this party that are where do you think your imagination may take you, but also somewhere else. So it's really incredible and very profound, really. And speaking of that, in locations and things like that, what is your approach to research? Do you have to do a lot? Because I lived in Los Angeles for 4 years. Granted, not in the 50s. But you really seem like
great.
Oh, thank you. Yes, a lot of lotion. But you capture a place, New York as well as Los Angeles, without hitting the reader over the head. It's all these kind of subtle touches you do, and I'm just wondering, also with some of the references to art and to film, but it's all just organic, and I'm wondering if that's a challenge for you, if you have to do a lot of research.
I'm such a dick. It's not a challenge at all. It's basically it's the stuff that's in my head, and it's did I do research for this book? Yes. Did I open Google Maps and find out like what street intersects Sunset right before it takes its crooked turn? Yes. Did I did I look up the actual chemical composition of semen? Yes, I did. Did I did I make stuff up? Yes. The book is historical fiction, but there's some of it that's just flat out not true. I mean, the last American battleship was built in Brooklyn, but it was launched in reality about 6 months earlier than it is in the novel. And that's one of those things that I just twisted because I wanted to. It fit the story better. Happenings, the kind of 1960s like Fluxus adjacent art movement happened in my novel about 17 years early. They didn't actually happen in New York in the late 40s. But like, as far as like sitting down and reading a bunch of books before I write the book goes, no. If I need something that I don't know, I make it up and then I go back to see if it's true. And even if it's not true, sometimes I keep it, and sometimes I adjust it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're not being a dick. If something comes easy for you, it's like, well, no, that wasn't a challenge, and other things maybe are. So
I can't back the car into the garage.
yep. See, there we go. Yeah, not perfect. There is to me, the book is also in a lot of ways a book about pretending. And you could look at the parallel of writing screenplays, and there's actors and actresses in the film. But it's also, of course, about McCarthyism and about having to hide who you are, whether or not you're a communist, whether you're gay, whether you're a European immigrant. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this kind of act of pretending and how it also kind of parallels the days we're living in some scary ways. Sorry, I have your question.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of pretending in the book. There's a lot of acting in the book. There's a lot of I mean, part of the reason that like I was so drawn to the kind of the sci-fi element, he writes these like B science fiction movies, is that he feels like an alien visiting this really strange planet called Los Angeles that doesn't make any sense to him. But he, finds a way to hide in it and blend in for a while. And yeah, I think the very interesting thing about you asking me about, does it apply, how is that in conversation with, today, our modern era? I think that we're kind of in an era when everybody feels as though it's some sort of great affront to pretend in any way, to act in any way, and there's almost this resentment toward being asked to play a role, and sometimes roles are a lot of fun. And I think there's and it's a natural reaction. I think we're in a period of immense reactionary politics, whether you're on the right or the left. And it's I don't know, it's kind of an interesting thing to think. Part of what I played with in the book is it's really fun to kind of be outlawed in a certain way, And that's part of what George enjoys when he's like sucking dick in the subway in New York, It's a lot of kind of that thrill of like going in the underground of the city and being unseen and doing this right before everybody's knows, and then going to like a fancy art opening or something, and nobody has any idea what's swimming around inside you. It's a fun thing to play with, and I think to harken back to my previous book, it's something that social media definitely disincentivizes and discourages, which is the idea that like you can keep secrets, you can be private, you can play a role right in front of somebody and enjoy the performance.
That's excellent. Excellent answer. I'm like, good book, and now I'm gonna yes, talk about your answers. Can you talk a little bit, and maybe this is rehashing it a bit, about the creation of George? And I feel like you're gonna say, you know, he kind of maybe spoke to you and he came out very organically, but all the characters are nuanced and they feel very fleshed out. But George particularly, I mean, he's the you know, the protagonist. And to me, he's very sympathetic. Could you talk a little bit about George, the Hungarian immigrant, who, of course, lost track of his parents in Europe, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so I did another interview where somebody was like, so you're Hungarian? I was like, no. I was like, well, you're Jewish? I was like, no. I am indeed a homosexual. But yeah, it was, he was, I think part of what is really easy as a fiction writer, I think, is this idea of the alien or the foreigner or the observer, somebody who doesn't feel like they actually do belong, and so they pay attention, they watch, they study things very carefully, and without, again, kind of like being there in secret without anybody knowing, they're playing a lot of games privately in their head with what they see and what they observe. And that gave me, I guess, a rich landscape to kind of play with all kinds of different games in language and observation and character. And obviously, you know, like any character in a book that you write, there's a lot of you in that character. And the thing is, it's like, you know, people always want to say, like, well, which character are you? And you're like, I'm all of them because I wrote them, you know, all of them. And it's really like, if you can imagine, you know, not looking into if you imagine looking into a mirror, it's not like, oh, that character is reflecting back at you. It's more like a smashed mirror, and that character is like all these different like faces. It's like little bits and pieces and fragments of yourself that you like secrete throughout the book. Disgusting word. But they're also not you. You know, you give them a lot of characteristics that you find kind of upsetting or repugnant or vile, or also things that you would like to do. I mean, you asked about Paris earlier. I've never been to Paris, and it seemed like a really nice place for George to live. So I was like, you know, I'll send him to Paris. You know, sounds fun.
It's very nice of you.
I mean, that's the fun of fiction. I mean, that's also kind of to a very great degree pretending. I mean, you're you know, putting yourself in these people that don't exist before you start. So no, there's definitely a lot of that in this book, where there's these nuanced characters like George that I mentioned, and what you said a moment ago about him being this kind of quiet person in the corner, the foreigner, the alien, observing. Just the passage you read at the beginning of the book, you can already see that. You know, you can see he's quiet and he's thinking to himself. And you also do something really clever in this book, where the story is being told. It is through George, but it's not really. It's George's story, but it's coming through someone else that's heard the story from George. So it's really interesting how you frame that and how you've got to kind of finish the book to understand the angle that you take, but it's really clever and well done. I always like to ask, was there anything you were reading while you were writing this, or were there any books that kind of were, I don't know, inspiring, or something that maybe spoke to you when you wrote the book?
Yeah, I think there. If I had to, like, you know, pinpoint a source book for a lot of, especially the New York section, Mary Gabriel, I read it a couple of years before I started writing this book, and it really gave me a lot of the texture for the New York section. Is Mary Gabriel's 9th Street Women, her group biography of Lee Krasner, Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan. Those 5 abstract expressionist painters. Basically, the women who constantly get overshadowed by Jackson Pollock and Elaine de Kooning. That was huge in this book, and there's even I did something I'd never done in this book, where I have a notes section, and I did leave a note in there about that book, because there is a sequence where like there's a lot of details that I kind of like put in there from that book. and that's where I got to know a lot about Bill and Elaine de Kooning and their relationship. And there's characters in this book called Gil and Yvette, who are, you know, it's made up, it's fiction. And yeah, that was a big one. And I think stylistically, I read Alexander Tishma's Use of Man, and he does a thing in that book where he will like just start like a list and just like list things as though, and that you get like a character throughout that, and I'm like, I'm stealing that, I'm totally doing that. And that slowly becomes a stylistic choice throughout the book. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know. There's probably more. I can't remember it at the moment.
A lot
but
of it can be unconscious.
yeah, no, I mean, I mean, basically, you know, writers are untrustworthy, dangerous people. They're paying attention to absolutely everything you do, and they're constantly soaking things up. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, if I see a book that's $28, but I know that there's like a line or two that will inspire me to do something, I will buy the book because it helped me write this one line in like a 300-page book. It doesn't matter. So, absolutely. That's really all the questions. I have to say that it's such a beautifully written book. I know I'm kind of just repeating myself, but it's also, and not in the cliched sense, really it's a page turner. I mean, you really get invested in these characters. And there's this momentum where you want to know where it's going, where these characters are going to head. And it's just, congratulations. I wish you all the success. It's a fantastic book.
Do you have any questions? The woman in the front row, who could she be?
Are you a sponge?
Is that your real question? This is an anti-Mame reference, referencing Agnes Gooch. Yes, I am a sponge. All right, next question. Damien.
What does the title mean?
What does the title mean?
Give us a spoiler.
Well, it's kind of a couple.
Color movies, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So he's writing these movies in 1956 in Hollywood, and the studio head is like saying, kind of holding the carrot over his head of like, maybe we'll give your next one color or whatever. And then it also refers to his time in New York when he's hanging out with all these abstract expressionist painters who decide that color is kind of a non-binary way of approaching visual space. And this is another note in the book, because I stole this from Max Kozloff, who wrote a 1966 essay in Art Forum about Venetian painting, and he talks about how color is very different, or very difficult to approach, because it's not up, down, right, left, dark, light. It's multi-relational, it's multi-dimensional. You can't say something is, I don't even know how to. We don't even. It's like trying to describe a smell. You know what I mean? It's one of the most difficult things to describe to another person. Is like, how would you describe the colors in a Lee Krasner painting without like just naming colors? How would you describe the smell of something without like getting really gross? Like so it was kind of reflecting this belief that these painters had of how color was kind of the future of painting. And obviously, has a little bit of a melancholic association with that.
So you talked about like some of your stylistic influences and like inspirations, and it makes me really curious about like the aesthetic of the book. And in the reading, a lot of the imagery for me was in like wit and like the wryness of the writing, and I was wondering if you could comment on like the aesthetic that you want the reader to kind of encapsulate by the end of the book, and also with that, like what music should I be listening to when I'm reading?
Oh man. Probably jazz before it went avant-garde. I would say like nothing after Kind of Blue. I mean, I'm not knocking the music. I'm just Mingus. Yeah, I could do that, I guess. Yeah, a little bit. I think Birth of the Cool is a good one for this. Yeah, not Sketches of Spain though.
No.
Not Coltrane's Meditations for sure. But yeah, I'd say like jazz that doesn't kind of get your blood pressure up too high. Just a little bit of a. And then I don't know the aesthetic overall. I think of the novel. Well, I think of kind of all my fiction as a bit of a trick. There's something going on that you don't see for a long time, and you're kind of lulled into this sense of security, comfort, whatever, and then that comes out. And there's a big emotional shift in this book, probably about 3/4 of the way through, maybe more. Yeah, I think like, if you think of it like a movie, think of one that you're gonna laugh, you're gonna cry, you're gonna be disturbed. I hope. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Speaking of movies, if this book was made into a movie, who would you want? What actor would play George?
It's really funny. People ask me that, and in my fiction, I've realized I don't really ever describe people. Very rarely. Sometimes I reference hair color, but I don't see faces at all. It's kind of, people have kind of questioned me about this before. I don't see faces of my characters at all. I never see faces. I don't know why. Who would I want to play Madeline? I can't remember her name. She played the mom in Saltburn. Yes. Right? Yeah, she'd be perfect. She could do it. Yeah. But as far as George/Georgie goes, I don't know. It's a good question. It's also not up to me. I'd rather just take the check and run.
Yeah.
All right. What time is it? Any other questions? Oh my God, it's early. You can be here all night. What do you? Yes.
This is kind of I'm only up to New York. Okay.
All right.
Full disclosure, but I keep on feeling like as I'm reading that like, wait for it, like Orson Welles is behind me. And he'll like try to like narrate over like my voice. I'm like, get the beep out, Orson, I'm trying to read this novel. But I kind of like it because there is a mischievousness about George.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of associating George with Orson Welles. I don't know how you feel about that, but
I could go with that. Could you phrase that in the form of a question? Yeah. Are you really doing the comment thing?
I did the comment.
You have more of a comment? No, I'm good.
But I do have
No, I know what you mean.
the tripartite thing. I mean, you already kind of asked about the 3-part structure. I am really fascinated by it. There's actually 4.
There's actually 4, yeah.
Sorry.
The last part is very small. It's more of like a coda.
Okay.
Yeah, so the novel's broken up into 4 cities: Los Angeles, New York, Las Vegas, and Paris. And Paris is like kind of a little goodbye section.
So there's nothing more than just instinct about that structure? Because it feels...
Mostly instinct, yeah. I mean, so going back to what I said earlier about music, I feel like I can't write a novel if I don't have a very clear idea of like a musical structure to it. And if I was gonna, I think of Some Hell as definitely more of an album. This one would be more of a symphony.
Yep, that makes sense.
Allegro, Oh my God, Adagio, I guess, and then what's the really fast one? I don't know Italian. And anybody?
Presto.
Yeah. Then that, and then the little coda at the end. It's actually analogous to Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, I guess. He didn't have to do that fourth part, but he did, and it totally like changes the symphony. It's great. Yeah. Orson Welles. Yeah. Whatever happened to him, he died. Spoiler.
Was he the one that had the rosebud in the movie, or was that a different one?
Who's that?
So,
What a dumb movie.
But he made other ones.
We watched it. Junior in high school or whatever. I just thought it was stupid.
all right. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
So, kind of describe as you're writing a novel, you think of music and like movements and stuff, but how does that process kind of compare when you were writing Image Control, which is...
Oh yeah. This is weird. I thought of Image Control as a parabola. I started in a place of like immense politics and rage, and like went down to this place of like, I am obsessed with language, and then back up to like, no, I'm angry again. And it was very much a novel driven by like hate, or not a novel, a book driven by like hate, and anger and like hurt and shock. So if just to fill anybody in who's not familiar, Image Control is a long form essay that I wrote during the Trump presidency, kind of unpacking how social media basically primed America for fascism, and it's a very angry book, and yeah, it wasn't very musical at all. There's a little bit of that going on in there, and how I like kind of pace things out, but it was very much a weirdly like a graphing calculator novel. I could see like the shape that I wanted.
Was it kind of like a cathartic?
I wanted it to be. Yep. Yeah, I wanted it to be. All right.
Can I ask a comment?
You can.
So you talked about structure and how there's like a shocking event in this book. So what does that mean for like rereads, right? Like, what's the experience rereading it? And
I might be the only one. I don't. I think when you're reading something you've read before, you're looking for different things. So you're not you maybe aren't looking with that sense of expectation, but you're maybe looking at either like the craft or something. It's like if you rewatch a movie, you're like, oh, I didn't notice that joke or that what they were wearing, that sweater that the director's using symbolism. So I think you approach it maybe looking at different things, and that probably goes for rereading a lot of books. So I guess it is a different experience, but I think equally rewarding. So
yeah, good answer. And I think when you reread or rewatch or re-listen, actually, I mean, people always ask us about books, like, why do you reread books? I'm like, how many times have you listened to a song? You do it all the time, and it's kind of you start to get an immense sense of pleasure seeing how the thing is put together. That's what I love about rereading so much, is that you can, knowing what's coming, you see all the little foreshadowing, I guess, to use a really boring term, but you see the way that the book has been primed in a lot of ways, and it's really wonderful. I mean, a movie I never get tired of rewatching is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and every single time I see something new in it. Every single time there's like a new detail I missed. It's just fucking great. It's so good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Given that it's a historical novel, how did you navigate sort of the ambient pressure to speak and represent queer joy, if that's even something like we need to prioritize in our writing, or, and especially how do you navigate it in a time when it was like bad vibes all around?
Yeah.
Or just, you know, maybe
So,
a different relationship.
no, it's actually interesting. There's a sequence in the book that I think kind of addresses this. What is the line? In every life, there's a, wait, what does it go? I don't know. If only there was a way to find out. In every life, there's a period of happiness like a star scratch across the night. It isn't planned and it cannot last, but it is there. And it's a, I think this idea of queer joy is, it's an interesting, can't forget what state we're in. It's an interesting reaction to, you know, a lot of entertainment at the time. You know, I mean, there's a really great, how many have read The Price of Salt? Carol, you know. She writes an afterword in that of how, you know, she published this under a pseudonym, and she got letters for decades from people saying that that was the first book they had ever read where the, you know, two same-sex characters do not end up dead, hospitalized, unhappy in a heterosexual marriage or whatever. You know, it's at great cost, but they still end up together. And it's, so, you know, we were kind of conditioned for a long time to expect misery for queer characters. But, you know, the reality is, do you know a queer person who is totally well-adjusted and happy? But then again, do you know an American who is totally well-adjusted and happy? And it's one of those things that it's another one of those ways that books kind of get discussed in consumerist terms by a very consumerist culture, and this is what Goodreads is. It's, you know, turning books into consumer objects that are a part of your lifestyle and that supplement your personality. And I don't know, I think it's also kind of fits very well in the American misunderstanding of happiness. What Americans are really chasing when they want happiness is security. They want contentment. They want freedom from the constant pressure to figure out where their next, you know, how their next injury is going to get paid for. But happiness is something that's very, very different. Joy is something that's very, very different. And I think the other thing that I think is interesting about joy, that, you know, how many novels, period, do you read about joy? How many novels, period, do you read about happiness? How many movies are there about happiness? It's, I think one of the things that makes it such a unique emotion is that we're not thrown out of time when we're happy. We're not thrown out of time when we're experiencing joy. And part of like why people try to reconstruct an emotion through language is because they've been thrown out of time. And there's nothing, basically, if you're happy, there's nothing wrong. You wish you, most times I think you wish you were in another moment. And happiness is one of the very few times when you don't. And that's also, I think, why my book has so much sex in it, because that's another. It's a moment. It's a state of being that doesn't need language. That's why books don't get written about it. That is a really great line to end on. Yeah, I know I did that last time and it was really loud. The last time I was here. Yeah.
Perfect. Why don't we walk over to the glass tables? Give you guys give us a minute or two to get over there, and then you can show us your consumers. So.
For a hardcover, it is only $26. That is very cheap these days.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. That explains it.
Oh, like you know your mind?
I'm like,
Yeah, I thought you only buy
I didn't see it until I already said it.
it's all right.
Did you get here on time or almost?
Walked some circles trying to find a not ripped up sidewalk because I didn't pay attention. But yeah, other than that. It's ironic that the drive was fine. I figured it extra 20 minutes and That's very good. This is the first one that leads up to it.
Yeah.
Wasn't able to make
Well, I'm glad you made it. They said like tomorrow. They've had all this time to like get it to you like on the day that it comes out.
right.
Yeah. I mean, you could order it. That's what a lot of places. Bookshop, I think there's another. Maybe they don't ship it until you launch it. No, they can do it early so that it gets to you on the day.
Oh, I know.
And Patrick from there actually some arts and local stores that started selling over the weekend.